The following podcast is a mass media production.
Hi, I'm Josh Galindo.
And I'm Krystal Galindo. Welcome to the Going Galindo Rugrats and Renovations podcast.
A lifestyle podcast where we will offer our experience and expertise in building real, lasting wealth through renovating and flipping homes.
And the chaos that comes with balancing a family of 6, leaving nothing unsaid.
Follow our wild ride we call life and apply our lessons to your own journey. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good.
This is the first episode of season 2.
I know. It's very exciting.
I know. We haven't done this for a while.
I know. I feel like I need to warm up.
Maybe not together. I did one the last season. The last episode
Yeah,
that I
you
recorded
did.
was Robert.
Yeah.
And that was alone. And that was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. Probably 2 weeks ago. And then at least 2 weeks before that. So yeah, you and I haven't done this for about a month.
I know.
Crazy.
I have nerves.
Let's shake the nerves.
Okay.
All right. So tell me about your coffee you have in front of you.
Well, I can only have so many different kinds of coffee because of the no sugar and, trying to be super clean and healthy. So I used to get what you get, the skinny vanilla with coconut milk. But
Skinny vanilla with coconut. Okay.
milk latte. But that was just kind of like, I was kind of over that
So
taste.
what'd you do here?
So this is just espresso with chocolate almond milk.
Espresso with chocolate almond milk. Mm-hmm. It's funny how they can manipulate these things to taste good.
Yeah, so I don't know how healthy it is, but
Ugh.
it sounds healthy.
Honestly, I don't think that's good. You're enjoying that?
Well, good. Now you won't drink my coffee.
Wow. All right. So we left off last season with some shocking news, to say the least.
Yeah.
I know for me, when I recorded that episode, it was a very raw moment. We had very few answers.
Right.
And because of the lack of answers, I felt still very scared. So a lot has happened since then.
Yes.
And we're not going to talk about it too much in this episode.
Well, there's just a lot to talk about, so we'll do another episode.
Specific to the topic.
Yeah, just to follow up and kind of not leave everybody hanging who is. I don't know who's hanging, but if you are, then
I'm sure people
we'll
are
give a
hanging.
little update. But I am good.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, to recap.
I'm handling it okay.
Krystal is perfect, whole, and complete. She's healthy. She is proving her nickname in my world of being tough as nails. We're excited because when you start, that means there has to be a finish.
Yeah.
And the fact that we started means there will be a finish.
Right. I got 1 down, 15 to go.
Exactly. So the next episode, stay tuned for that because we're going to really dive into it. We're going to explain a lot of the processes, a lot of the details. There's just so much. It doesn't make sense to force it into a quarter or a half of an episode.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of decision making, a lot of emotion, a lot of support, a lot of the whole nine. So stay tuned for that episode. I think that'll be the next one that we record.
Yeah.
So, and whenever the powers at be decide to release it, they'll release it.
Hey, I wanted to take a moment to tell you about Battle-Born Injury Lawyers. They handle personal injury, which covers everything from auto accidents to wrongful death. You never know when something bad will happen to you or your family. Be smart about it and make sure that you have a resource to contact right away if you should ever need it. Put Matt's number in your phone now. He will not let you down. It's 702-570-9000.
So today, there's just so much going on TikTok and Instagram and social media and all these different outlets about buying rentals.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help myself because it's feeding me more of it knows everything. So it's feeding me a lot of it. So I keep seeing the BRRRR model. I keep seeing buy properties and get all of your money back out and leverage them to the moon. Buy.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is it's kind of reminding me of like 2005, 2003, 4, 5, and 6, where like real estate is the new frenzy. It's like the new GameStop.
Yeah.
Everybody buy real estate, buy real estate, buy real estate. So I just thought that we should have an episode specific to that. We can explain what our model is.
Yes. That I came up with all by myself.
That Krystal single-handedly designed. Yeah. It's available at krystalgalindo.com in paperback. It's a #1 bestseller in the New York Times. All right, so we're going to go on about us and what I think the best thing to do, because this is a vocal thing, so it's difficult. If you were sitting in front of me, it'd be easier to explain it because you'd be able to see the things that I'm writing down, and the way that I communicate is a lot of visual.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to just like give advice. It's easier just to say, well, this is what we did and this is what we found worked.
Right,
so it's
exactly.
just sharing our experience.
Really well said. I'm actually glad that you said that, because what we are doing doesn't mean it's the only way to do it.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's even the right way to do it.
Right.
There's an argument that what I'm doing is absolutely asinine. I've been told by other investors that what I'm doing is simply stupid. For me, it works for the Galindo family.
Right.
It works for a lot of different reasons, and I guess we'll go into that as we go. So I thought I'd just take us back to like when it all started.
Yeah.
In 2015, I had a relationship with my first investor that was funding my first flips.
Yep.
Actually, I mean, that was started in 2010-ish, 9. Okay.
Yeah.
2009, went till 2015. Long story short, I built a pool in my backyard, and he got really upset about it. And we had a 2-year lawsuit over it, of which I won, which proved that I did nothing wrong.
When Kennedy was 3 weeks old.
When Kennedy was 3 weeks old, yeah. And I won, and he had to pay me all of the money he owed me, plus attorney's fees. And I made sure that he wrote the check payable to me personally because I wanted it to sting that bad.
Do you still have those checks framed?
Yes, and I have them framed along with the letter from the arbitrator awarding me the case. Okay, so here I am. I've got about $400,000 in the bank. I've got no investor. Excuse me. I had no investor. I had about $400,000 in the bank. Krystal and I decided that we would never, ever use another investor again. So we had bought a few homes with the reserves that we had, which $400,000 really only put you in a position to probably buy 2 at the time. So we were like, we'll just build this thing back up, but just us, nobody else.
Right, which that was like a hard decision to make because we just decided that I was going to quit Cosmo, working at Cosmopolitan, and I was just going to be working with you before this happened. And then you just wanted to stick to that. And I'm like, I don't want to spend any of this money.
I want you to keep communicating your feelings in it and through the process.
I think I got hives
valid.
that time too.
Yeah, Krystal probably had a meltdown. So we had bought a few homes by ourselves, and then I had met a new round of investors that kind of blew a new level of life into the flipping model that I thought would benefit me and obviously them.
Well, and it was going to benefit you because you couldn't buy, like all of the money that we're using for reserves to buy rentals is what you needed to flip. So if you had an investor with the flipping part, you would be able to save and you wouldn't have to use that as working capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it freed up our personal funds to allow us to go and buy rental properties. So long story short, I got in bed with the new guys, and now I had 400, and they respectfully asked that I don't flip outside of using their money, which makes sense because it's a tough thing to
pick and choose who gets what.
Choose which deal should go. So if you just give it all to one guy, there's no conversation about integrity or anything like that.
Yeah, it keeps it fair.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing that I'm going to say is we are recording at the Galindo Group Real Estate office today in the conference room that acts as a ping pong table because when I built this table, I asked the fabricators to build it to the precise dimensions of a ping pong table, so the exact height, width, and length. And so if you hear any talking in the background, that's because we are in the office during business hours and people are working. Okay, so we had the new investors, right? And we had this money sitting around.
Yep.
And I started saying to myself, well, what should I go do with this money? And I was like, why not just buy rental properties? And I didn't understand any of this. I didn't have I didn't have TikTok to explain stuff to me. I didn't have Google. I didn't have mentors. I just knew it was a very simple model that if I bought a property and put a tenant in it, that I would be 100% in control of the asset, 100% in control of the income of the asset. And I just said, this money's sitting here doing nothing.
Yeah, it was sitting there doing nothing, and you're trying to create a monthly income, like as if you had like if I was working, we'd have a monthly income. So you're trying to create a consistent monthly income so that you could go do whatever with work.
I wonder if that was a piece. If that's what you recall, then I don't doubt that was my
No, you
thought
wanted
process.
to have like, it started with 1,000. Okay, well, this makes the car payment. So now I just need to make money for everything else. And it's like the next 1,000. Okay, well, this pays for this,
One of the big blessings that I had in my life, and I'm just going to say this, and I think it's what's forced me to be in the position that I'm in, is one, in 2011, whatever. In 2010, I lost a home to short sale. I didn't lose it to foreclosure, but it wrecked my credit. I didn't have a foreclosure on my credit, but I had like 350 30-day lates. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the first property, and then again on a second property. So it inhibited my ability to borrow. So being a creative, persistent person, I didn't just stop. I figured out how to still acquire real estate. But I was very focused on debt-free, debt-free, debt-free. For many reasons, I never wanted to come home to the home that I had bought and look at the kids or look at you and say, hey, Dad messed up. And because he messed up, we have to move out. So I was like, if I'm going to have kids, if I'm going to get married, if I'm going to create the next level of my life, I wanted it to be so stable that nobody could take it away from me because I had experienced losing 2 homes. So at the time, we actually owned White's Landing pretty much cash.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Back to 2015.
We kind of bought it cash and then got a line on it. Anyway, so we owned our house cash.
Yeah, because we didn't have really the option to have a
loan. We couldn't get a loan.
You couldn't get a loan.
That's right.
I think that helps force you to save. Instead of it being like, oh, I just can't buy because I can't get a loan. It's like, well no,
we'll
you
just do
can
it different
buy.
way.
Yeah, you just have to buy it differently. Yeah.
So we own that house cash. All right. So now I said, I've got this money sitting in the bank. It's doing nothing. So I remember I woke up. There was a perfect home that was in the Northwest, Cheyenne and 215, single story, about 1,400 square feet, 2-car garage, like a 95 build, which for those of you that are listening that understand this, it's a tile roof stucco finish. That kind of gives you the era that house was built. I think the opening bid was like $125,000. Well, I knew from being beat by many buy and hold investors at the auction that
wait really quick, buy and hold? Explain that really quick because you just throw that term around. But.
Easy. Buy and hold.
Yeah.
That means that they don't have to have the margin necessary to fix the property up, resell it, and generate a profit. So they could pay a little bit more than the flipping investors. So I knew that I could always beat the flipping investors if I shifted my model to buy and hold. So when I saw that house pop up, I immediately comped it. I thought it was probably worth about $235 at the time. So I figured I can buy it for at least $150, $155. Yeah. So opening bid's $130, whatever it is. I don't even know if I communicated to you what I was doing that day. Did I? I just came home and said I bought 2 rentals.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I go down there and I pluck 2 properties. There was actually one on Cheyenne and 215, one behind Rhodes Ranch on Fort Apache in Warm Springs in a community called Huntington. So I bought that one for $150 as well, and I paid $150 for the other property. When I bought those properties at that time, this was when homeowners were being foreclosed on. So it was kind of a blessing. I just went to the house, knocked on the door, said, hi, my name's Josh. And I'd been used to doing this because I'd been buying so much at the auction.
Yeah.
I just bought your home from the auction. Ugh, that sounds terrible. I just bought this property at the auction. And they knew. They had been making the payments for 2 years or 3 years, maybe even longer. And I said, you have 2 options. You can move out. I'm going to fix it up and rent it, or you can stay, and nothing changes in your life.
Yeah, like what a blessing.
What a blessing, right. Just start paying me the rent. So I know that worked on the first one. The second one was super clean. They kind of ran out of there in the middle of the night, just left some stuff behind. So I cleaned that up, painted it, got those both up and running. The first one was paying roughly $1,000 a month. The second one was paying $1,200. That was $2,400 a month in brand new income. And if you times it by 12, that's about $30,000 a year. So by investing that money, I literally picked up a base income
Yeah.
for the general public.
Yeah.
About $30,000. So I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And what does that do? It pays for specific debts that I have. So if I have a car payment, that I love cars, and cars come with car payments, especially if you want a new one every few years. So that paid for that. And then left some money left over. So we started to pay for our extracurricular activities with rental income.
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to I got to stay focused here. So I
Yeah.
made notes. So if I'm bouncing around a little bit, it's because I'm following my notes. So in the beginning, I didn't realize that I wanted to own 30 properties.
Right. No, you start with a more attainable, realistic goal.
So, and that's what people always ask, because they hear me say 30, and they're like, they almost sit back in their chair and go, how the hell am I ever going to get there?
Right. And I
And my
think
argument,
we would have thought the same thing.
of course, of course. I remember having a feeling like that, where someone told me to do something, and I remember looking at them going like, not a chance. But so that same feeling can be overwhelming to most people. But what I tell people today, how do you get to 30 properties, is start with one. And the first batch will be very painful to purchase.
Yeah.
But as soon as the cash flow pays all of your bills, all of a sudden that pain will go away, because you don't care so much about how much cash is in the bank, because you don't need the cash to live on, because you have the cash flow to live on. So that feeling will start to shift from, why am I investing $150,000 to generate $1,000 a month? Well, you start there and you just keep duplicating that. But before you know it, you've got $5,000 a month. And assuming you live modestly, now all of your bills are paid. Now you don't care so much about how much cash is in the bank. So now you start buying rentals quicker, because you don't have to hoard cash.
Right.
And all of a sudden your machine begins to move a lot quicker. So now you got rentals 6, 7, 8, 9. Now you got $10,000 a month. Okay, so that was how I started. And I thought it was important to go into that, because I didn't start by just waking up and going, I got a couple $1 million, I'm going to go buy 30 properties. No, this has been a 5-year model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing that I think is really important for anybody in real estate, or in any industry that has ups and downs, is you have to fill the downs. Because I know for me, psychologically, I was less productive and unable to produce when my mind wasn't right.
Right.
That was the big thing for me when buying rentals. I had to fill the low. The ups obviously would take care of themselves, but the low was so bad that you could get stuck in the low. So for me, I was like, so I just kind of analyzed my situation at all times throughout my whole life. I'm like, what's making me most productive right now? What is making me least productive right now? How do I do more of the productive thing, and how do I fix the thing that's not creating productivity? And in that moment in my life, I knew that I needed to create income for when things got tough, or when things slowed down, or whatever it was. And so that was a big part of buying rentals, is it creates peace of mind. So if the next deal doesn't come, there's no panic session. You're living good. You can keep a good mind and prepare yourself for when that opportunity shows up. If you're starting to worry about how to pay your cell phone bill, how much gas you need to keep or save,
Then you start making
groceries.
decisions based on desperation, and that's
What do I
not,
always say about desperation?
you don't want to work with people that are
Don't
desperate.
operate from desperation, and don't work with people from desperation.
Because they're not making good decisions.
They're not making good decisions, and never fool yourself. If it comes down to that person and their family and you almost can't blame them for picking them and their family.
You can't, but yeah.
And that's how we're bred.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's our DNA. So don't operate from a place of desperation. So the other thing is that I learned as we went. You know, 2 properties is easy, but and then how to manage tenants and repairs and this and that. And as things progressed, I started saying, okay, I think I know what I want to buy here. And so the type of product that I bought, so listen closely, this is the model that I've always lived by. And it's shifted as time has gone on, because the market has gotten stronger. Initially, my model was, if it's a single story, 2-car garage, 3-bedroom, under $150,000, buy it.
You have to.
You have to buy it. And that model worked for about the first 4.5, 5 years, because there was inventory that popped up with that criteria. And my logic was, is I want to buy the assets that I'm always hedging my bet against a bad market because I lived through a bad market.
Yeah.
I wanted to hedge my bet against in the event that the market goes bad. And what I didn't want to do is spend $270,000 on an 1,800 square foot 2-story in Mountain's Edge that when the market gets bad, the rent's $1,000. That's a pretty heavy asset to have income at only $1,000. But if the market goes bad, rents almost always for a single family home stop going down at about $900 to $1,000. So I figured if I could get my purchase price low enough and then align myself with the minimum rent that any market should demand, then those two things aligned. So that's why I liked that house. Single story, you could rent it to anybody. Wheelchair, grandma, older person, family, anybody. 2-story, you eliminate that whole sector. So I wanted to focus on single story. So a lot of my portfolio is single stories. So that was the product that I'm buying. I hope that one sunk in. Now here's the numbers. Is for me, I always said to myself, if I'm walking into the property with equity, so if I bought it for $150 and it's worth $220, so that's appreciation. And the way that you can analyze these deals is what I want to explain here. I'm going to try to make this as clear and precise as possible. There's 2 ways to analyze deals. And what I want to make sure that people listening understand is that an investment is analyzed over the life of the investment. It's not analyzed only over the first year. So if you buy a house for $100,000 and it's worth $150,000 and it generates $1,000 a month, what you do is you take the $100,000, which is the initial investment, you set that aside, you take the rental income for the life of the investment. So if it's 2 years, that's $12,000 a year, that's $24,000 over 2 years. And then you take the appreciation. So let's say in 2 years that property went from $100,000 to $150,000. You now have $50,000 in appreciation and you have $24,000 in income. So you would take the $50,000 plus 24, which is $74,000 that the asset has generated since owning it. Now you take that amount and you divide it into the amount that it took you to generate that income, which is the profit divided by the cost of the asset. That's a very basic real estate 101 rate of return. You need to understand that. If you don't understand rate of return, you need to understand that. And then whatever that percentage that it spit out is, you divide it by the amount of time that you held the asset. Did that make sense? Okay, because there's a thing called time value of money. It's very important to take that into consideration. If you buy a home for $100,000 and it becomes worth $200,000, I'm just going to ask you straight. That sounds really good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what if it takes 100 years to get there?
Right.
Not very good.
No.
Terrible annual rate of return. What if it takes you 1 year to get there? Spectacular annual rate of return. There's 2 components to investing. ROI, simple, return on investment, and then time value of money. Okay. And what that means is I often will hear people say, oh, I'm a house flipper too. Okay, great. What was the deals that you've done? Well, I bought this house in March. It took me 9 months to fix it up. And then I sold it and I made $20,000. Well, in my mind, they didn't take into account the formula of time value of money. It's actually a terrible return for the flipping industry. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to consider that. So the way that I analyzed it was like this. If I can walk into a property that I know has built-in equity and only generate a 5% annual rate of return, I'm okay with that because I know when I go to sell the asset, I can account for the appreciation into my return.
Yeah. So
rule of thumb with investing, you should be making at least 10% on your money. 10% is arguably weak. And it's sad that America has been fed that it's okay to have your money sit into a fund and generate between 3 and 5%. That's junk.
Yeah.
It's shit. So for me, I want to make at least 10% a year. So if I walk in knowing there's appreciation, I'm okay only earning 5%. Okay. Now, there's a different type of asset. Let's say that the home is $100,000 and it's worth $100,000 that day that I bought it.
Yeah.
If that's the case, I need to earn a higher annual rate of return. I need to walk into the property earning 10%. Because I know I can't bake on future appreciation.
Right.
Make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Make sense? I just want to make sure because I want to create an education out of this podcast. So that's the way that I analyze my deals. If I'm walking in with appreciation, I'm okay with a lower annual rate of return. If I'm walking in with no equity, then I need to maximize my annual rate of return.
Right.
Okay. I hope that one sunk in. Okay.
That was a lot.
Hey, honey, do you know what time it is?
I mean, I think I do.
It's time to shout out sponsor Southwest Custom Construction and tell everyone how great they are.
Oh, okay. That's easy. Nick is our go-to contractor. There's a reason he's done more than $75 million in construction renovations. He does quality work, he's dependable, and he can help you with just about anything. Is there anything you would add?
Nick's a great guy. I think he covered what matters most. Give Nick at Southwest Custom Construction a call if you need a contractor you can count on. His number is 480-235-8148. When you first start, you want to buy properties that have built-in equity and the upside of appreciation.
Right.
Because unless you're just generating insane amounts of cash from your business or your job, then you need that to help propel you to the next level to help buy more rentals.
Right.
So that was why I was uber focused on that in the beginning. Because what I would do is I would sit down every year, 6 months, whatever it was, or whenever a lease would become, that's actually what we would do. That was my trigger. When a property went vacant, I took that as an opportunity to sit down and analyze the asset. So because I had bought them with the focus of equity, I knew that I could tap into that equity. So if a property went vacant, instead of me spending $5,000-$6,000 to recarpet it and paint it, which is technically 50% of what you generated for the whole year, I said to myself, is this a good opportunity to sell the asset? Now, I don't believe that today. I'm trying to go through my steps here of my journey. So during that time, I would say, okay, I bought this house for $150,000. Today, it's worth $300,000. If I'm going to invest $5,000 into that property to make it rent ready, why not invest $15,000? Excuse me, an additional $15,000, a total of $20,000 into the property to make it flip and sell ready. So
you could take all that money out.
So that I could access the equity in the property. So I'm going to use all gross figures here because I'm not going to complicate it with math. So I bought it for $150, put $20 into it. I sold it for $300, again, gross. Let's just say I netted $150. So now I have $300,000 in cash. So I had an asset that was holding $300,000 worth of cash, only generating $1,000 a month. No bueno. No. Okay. So I now recaptured the $300,000 and I went and redeployed that $300,000 into two $150,000 assets, generating $1,000 a month. So what I've done is I've split that investment, the $300,000 investment, into two. So the $300,000 investment one day was spitting out $1,000 a month. I fixed it up. I sold it. I accessed the $300,000 that it was holding. I went and bought two rentals for $150,000 each, both generating $1,000 a month. So now I've taken the same $300,000 and turned it into $2,000 a month. Right. That is really important in the beginning stages of your career. Buy property with equity. When it goes vacant, analyze it. See if you can take the money out and split it and buy two properties with the same money. And sometimes you won't be able to buy two properties with the same money. Right. You know, one might be $170. You sold it for $300. One property, the new buy may be $170. That only leaves you $130. So reach in your pocket, pull out the other $20 and slam it down. But you still bought two properties. Yeah. Okay.
Can you talk about the other way to do it? Because we sold it and did 1031 exchange. That's what you're talking about, right?
Well, yes, but you don't have to 1031 it.
No, but so the other option is you don't necessarily have to sell it. Can't you just refinance?
Yes, and that hold your thought just for a second, because that is a progression of where we went with this. Yeah. I just want to make sure that we've tapped into. So when you're building, make sure you have equity so that you could put yourself in. And then every time they go vacant, reanalyze the asset and see if it could be sold and split into two. Because what you're trying to do is get as many rentals as possible. So so now what we've learned is we were buying a lot of stuff cash. Everything was cash because I was, honestly, vulnerably speaking, afraid of debt. Because I didn't want to have to come home and tell my kids that we got to move because Dad made irresponsible real estate decisions. So I didn't like debt. As I educated myself more on debt and learned about debt, I started to say to myself, let's build a formula around responsibly using debt, which is what I really want to send home with this podcast. Because there's all these people on the social media outlets and all these big figures that are pushing people to use debt.
The
And they're
BRRRR model.
well, all of it. The BRRRR
Yeah.
model, borrow. And they're not explaining the downside to it. Debt is actually very much needed to grow a business, to build a rental portfolio. But nobody's saying, hey, if you don't use it responsibly, it'll wipe you off the face of the earth.
Right. Don't over leverage.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about the taxable event that took place if I bought that house for $150 and sold it for $300. So I have $150,000 in arguably in equity, right?
Yeah.
Now let's say that I want to access that $150. Let's actually walk through what ends up happening when you make that decision to try to attempt to access the $150. Bought the house for $150, tenant moves out, I walk the property, realize it needs $20,000 in improvements, okay? So tenant's gone, I got to shell out $20,000 of my own money. Tenant's gone for 3 months because I got to renovate it, market it, and then sell it. That's $3,000 worth of income that I've lost, right? So $20,000 in initial investment to improve it, $3,000 in lost rent, okay? And then I go to put it up for $300,000. If I sell it for $300,000, arguably you have to pay a 3% commission. That's a $9,000 commission on the way out. Let's say the buyer asks for $4,000 in closing costs because I'm generous and I'm not in a crazy market like we are right now, a realistic market. That's another $4,000 I got to shell. And then I got to pay real property transfer tax, which is $5.10 per thousand in Clark County. If anybody wants to calculate that on their own, now they'll know. $5.10 per thousand. That's real property transfer tax. That's a seller's expense. Let's call that $2,000, hypothetically speaking. Then you have to pay an owner's title policy. Owner's title policy, we'll call that $1,000. And then you got to pay $500 for the escrow fee. Call that $500, okay? So now what you've done is you got 20, 30, that's 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35,
44.
40. So we'll just call it about $45,000 in expenses, right? So when you made the decision to sell this asset to access that hypothetical $150,000, if you choose to do this, I need to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're really deciding to do. So you're accessing the $150. Well, right away, you've got to mark off $45,000 because that's what it took to get out of the asset, the improvements and all the other fees I just explained. So now you're left with rough round numbers. We'll call it $105,000, right? Well, what did you just do?
You made money. You have to pay taxes.
Good job. You create a taxable event. So now you got to pay taxes on the $105,000. Let's hope that you held the property for a year and a day. Now you have to pay capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Depending on your tax bracket, it can range. But let's just say that 15% comes off the top. So 15% of $105,000, we'll just call it $15,000. That leaves $85,000. So
no, 90.
Is it not? Well, because of the 105. Okay.
Yeah.
So 90, right? So it cost you $60,000 to access your $90,000. Does that ring a bell? Or does that resonate? You see how crazy that is? That's nuts. Okay. Sometimes you have to do that.
Right.
It is what it is. It's a part of the model. It's a part of the system. But there's a better way to do it. So, and this is where you and I sat down and calculated a formula on how to responsibly use debt.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say that the asset is paid for cash because that's what all of these scenarios are based on. And we want to access $150,000 of our $300,000 that's sitting in that property. And we want to go and buy another one to generate more income. So I sit down. This is the way that I calculated it. I've heard nobody out there talking about this. Is I say to myself, because I guess to create perspective, let me say this first. There is a moment when you can hate a piece of property. People think like it's only rainbows and butterflies the whole run.
Yeah.
There is a time when you could end up despising a piece of property. Well, let me show you what that looks like. Let's say that you borrow on the house $300,000. You go borrow $300,000, and the payment's $1,900 a month or $1,800 a month, whatever it is. And rents at that time are $1,900. You're cash flowing $100. Let's say that the market corrects. Let's say that the hedge funds decide to, or a lot of people start buying, and the hedge funds who bought a ton of homes put all of their rental properties on the market and start competing against you. Well, all that has to happen in the neighborhood is one house has to go for $1,400 a month, and that immediately resets the market. So your payment's $1,800, and your neighbor just rented his for $1,400. So now you're backwards $400 a month. Okay. Write that check for about 3 months and tell me if you still love that property.
Right.
That's how you can hate the property. What I want to make sure is clear here with that very simple scenario I just created. Imagine if what social media is preaching and selling, you went and created that I'm going to leverage $300,000 on the $300,000 asset scenario on 20 properties.
Right.
Let that sink in for just a second while I do the math.
Well, I was going to say, it doesn't have to just be the market. It could have just been what happened with COVID.
Right.
They don't have to, you can't kick them out. They don't have to pay their rent. And you have payments. You still have to make the payments.
Right.
You don't get the forgiveness.
So let's assume that COVID doesn't happen again, but I am going to tap on COVID. Let's just assume that the market just shifts, just natural movement of a market. And you have 20 of these homes. And all that happens is you went down $400 a month on each home. That's $8,000 a month you have to pull out of your pocket and put into these properties to keep them. That's $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
So unless you're making millions of dollars, then, I guess good for you. But even if you're making $1 million, nobody wants to write a check for $8,000 to keep holding property so that the tenant can be happy and pay their market rent. Let's take the extreme scenario that you just described. And these things can happen. Actually, I didn't even know that COVID could happen.
Yeah.
I didn't believe it when it was happening.
Yeah.
I was the one saying it ain't going to happen. I remember they said they're going to close the strip. I'm like, yeah, right.
They're like, shut up.
That can't happen. And you want to talk about who really didn't believe it could happen? Were the casino owners. Some of those casinos didn't even have doors because they were open 24 hours a day, so they had to go build doors to close them. Okay, so now you own 20 properties at $1,800 a month, and none of your tenants pay. That's $36,000 a month that you go backwards. Times that by 12. $432,000 a month for you to hold those 20 properties and salvage your credit and not look at bankruptcy as a solution. So that, I'm going to just sit for a moment. I want that to set in. That is the danger of irresponsibly using debt. Okay, let's say you lose one to foreclosure. You can't reborrow for 7 years unless you go hard money, which is a higher interest rate, which will make it much more difficult to find an asset that cash flows properly.
Right.
The creditors, if nobody's had a creditor come after them, I had 2 homes to go to short sale. I had a call every 15 minutes between the 2 homes from the most aggressive human beings I've ever met on the planet, telling me if I don't pay, they're going to eat my children. I mean, it was like crazy. Okay, I couldn't bluff my way out of it, none of that stuff, okay? That's how quickly real estate cannot be sexy, okay? So my logic was when I built the formula around borrowing money for the Galindo family, I'm not saying this is everybody's model. I hope, let me just shine some light on why people would leverage properties that much and buy that many. One, they're not making enough money, so they're not in a position to go and buy properties with less debt, so they depend on the debt to buy more property. So what I would say is you got to make a little bit more money first.
Right, you can't rush it.
Don't rush
slow.
it. It's an organic process. People think I woke up and I landed on 30 rental properties. Like, this has been a very thought out, slow, calculated process. Like, arguably we're bulletproof. I'd love to hear that from the guy holding 30 properties with 30 loans.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, the market could literally go, all of our assets could go to zero as far as value goes. The rents could go down 25% and we're still in a position to keep all of our properties and pay all of our bills.
Yeah.
So is that the right way? I don't know. It works for us. So why do people do that? I'm sure somebody's asking himself, well, why are all the social media guys saying that? Because they're banking on appreciation. A component of their formula is that they're banking on appreciation. And when you have 20 properties and all of them go up $1,000, you make $20,000. So that could be very sexy.
Yeah.
But and that's why I wanted to create some perspective because, well, then why are they telling us to do that? Because in the event that it appreciates, you get appreciation on 20 properties. Okay. So the other thing that I don't like with low cash flowing assets, which Vegas is not a market that these BRRRR models, I believe, can be used
Can you
here.
explain BRRRR? Because, I mean, you see it everywhere, but I don't. And it doesn't have to be really intense, just simple.
It's a simple form or simple statement. Buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. Buy, renovate. So buy the property, fix it up, get a tenant in there, refinance. That's the part that I'm talking about here. What they're saying is you buy a home for $100,000. Let's just say for easy math, $100,000. You put $20,000 into it to renovate it. Okay. Now you get it up for rent at, let's call it $1,500. Okay. And then you refinance it because you bought it for 100, but now it's worth 200 because of the renovations you've done. Okay.
Yeah.
And you go to the bank and you say, I have a new asset that's worth $200,000. I want to pull out 80% of that. So 200,000, $160,000. So you get made whole of your initial $100,000 investment. You get back your renovation cost of $20,000. And if you're in a perfect world, you get to put some money back in your pocket.
Right.
But now you own that asset has zero cash in it. And some of these guys are saying 80% is a model that I would appreciate and be respectful of. These guys are saying leverage this thing to 95% so that you put even more money in your pocket so you could take that more money in your pocket and go and buy another one and do it again.
Which sounds very
sexy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds
good. It's easy to sell. Shit, I should be the guy on social. I could sell it if it's a great model if you're in a market where you can see that it's a great model. Like a lot of these guys are in Oklahoma.
Right. It's a great model, but
Kansas
not
City,
necessarily for Las Vegas.
Mississippi, where where you can buy homes for $8,000, $25,000, $30,000, and they can resell for $130,000 if you put a lot of money into them to renovate them. Vegas doesn't really have those opportunities. They do exist, obviously. Anybody could steal a property in Vegas, but there's not like there's an abundance of them.
Right.
Okay. That's me explaining the BRRRR model. Okay, so here's how we chose to use debt responsibly. Is I said to myself, what is this house? We own the house cash. It's worth, go ahead.
Let's do the timeline. How many rentals did we have at that time that we were thinking about deciding to do it? Do you remember?
Well, funny you ask.
Oh, God.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, this just confirms how visual I am. So I think I built this when I was probably somewhere around here, about number 17. And I said, I want to get to 30. And so I know each time that I put a little house on my numbers, it refills my self-esteem bucket. It refills my momentum bucket. And it allows me to propel forward to the next one. I know for me, being a visual person, I need that. That's the formula that I operate best with. So that's why I created this really interesting board.
I also think when you write things down, it makes it more
real.
Absolutely. Yeah, more attainable.
Yep.
So we had 15 units that were all paid for cash, generating an income.
Correct.
Okay. And then we had Broadmeadow that had appreciated by how much?
150,000.
Okay.
Easy. It's probably worth 330.
Right. So
maybe even more today, but at that time it was 300.
150 sitting in this $300,000 property, right?
Yep.
So we had 150,000 that we could split. So all these scenarios are based off what we did, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, these are factual
All right.
scenarios. These are Krystal and Josh's formula. Yeah.
So 15 houses generating income with no debt. So
Correct.
then we start talking about debt.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So thank you for realigning me. I'll just keep going. Here's my formula, okay? I say to myself, this house is worth $300,000. What's the worst case scenario that's going to be worth again? And I said, well, in 2015, I bought it for $150. It was worth $230. So arguably the lowest it's probably ever going to go is $150. I mean, that's it'd have to go really, really bad. So I said, okay, so I will borrow that amount of money so that it should never go lower than that, putting me in a position, I call it mind fucked, is to have that property mind fuck me, where it's worth less than what I owe the bank. Okay.
Right.
So I knew that the house would never be worth less than $150,000. Now, how do I also structure that? I asked myself, what's the payment on $150,000? So it's $1,000 on $150,000, which I use private money to buy. So I think I got a rate of 6.5%. Okay. So then the second thing is I ask myself, what's the lowest the rent will ever be on that property? And I said, I think it's $950 to $1,000. So I make sure that however much I borrow, it never exceeds what I believe
The property can rent for.
the property can rent for. Repeat that in layman's terms.
I was just going to break it down more simple.
Go ahead.
So we had the house. So we didn't want to pull out everything from the house because that would create a higher payment. And the rent was $1,300. The payment could be more than $1,300. We didn't want to do that. So we wanted to max ourselves out at a payment of $1,000. So we took out however much money that was. I think it was like $150. And we knew that we were going to invest it into this other property that we were making $1,000 on. So technically, those two houses are bringing in $2,300 for a payment that's $1,000.
There you go. Yes. And our original income was $1,000.
Correct.
And our new net
$1,300,
income,
and then our new net income was $2,300.
Yeah, we basically ended up netting an additional $350 by doing that.
Yes.
And having a tenant help pay down the new debt on the property. So we're building equity, and we're cash flowing more.
We didn't have to sell it. We didn't have to fix it up to sell it.
Oh, yeah.
To get the money back. It
so
was
let's go
much
into
quicker.
That. Yeah, if you borrow, it doesn't create a taxable event. So we pulled the money out. So we got to access $150,000 from that property tax-free.
And you didn't have to come up with $20,000 to renovate it.
No out-of-cost expense either.
To sell it at its max.
All right, guys, let me make sure I give myself a really quick plug here. I just want to take a moment and make sure I'm crystal clear on what Galindo Group Real Estate offers to the Las Vegas public. We have a company called Galindo Buys Houses that buys homes as is, all cash, and can close in as little as 7 days with no appraisals, no commissions, and we pay all of the fees associated with the closing. So the number we give you is the number you should walk away with from the closing table. You pick your close date, and if you need to, you can stay up to 3 weeks after closing, giving you a home and the much-needed cash to make future decisions. Galindo Buys House is a locally owned company that takes the profits generated here in town and reinvests them locally. We're not that big hedge fund that takes the profits generated here and sends them off to New York and other big cities. I employ people here locally and invest here locally. If you or anyone you know is behind on payments, repairs, or inherited a tenant disaster, don't hesitate to give me a call. We will get you an offer in 5 minutes or less and close in 7 days or less. So please take this number down. It's easy, 820-CASH. Again, it's 702-820-CASH. Talk to you soon. So, honey, let's summarize some of this because I know that was a lot of information.
Yeah, that was a lot of information. I was zoning out a little bit. I'm like trying to focus.
I thought I was losing you.
No,
like,
I was just trying to focus.
honey.
I'm like trying to see where I can go in without interrupting you. I'm like, meh, it's all right.
Well, isn't that funny the way that, like, I saw all that in my mind.
I know you're very visual. Like you can create pictures in your mind doing it. And for me, I'm like, okay, I just need like simple little things to like say that'll resonate. And then if that resonates with somebody, then they'll be able to focus and listen to that. But if they don't have something that resonates, it's going to be too much. So we need to break it down like simple little.
Okay, so then let's have a fun game here.
Okay.
Okay, let's go through each topic. I think we started off with start.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Then we went into product, right? The type of product. Then we went into analyzing the deal, which is annual rate of return, ROI, plus / and or appreciation, right?
Yes.
That was probably where I lost everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's very hard for just like anybody listening.
Well,
That's why they need to have like, that's when they have to have someone like you helping them find a rental property because you can't just like find it. That's hard.
Understood. But here's what I want to say. If that was hard for you, that means that you don't know it.
Right.
So you need to go get educated because you're making a multi-$100,000 decision, and you're uneducated around the topic. So if that was uncomfortable, not easily grasped, then that's a really positive thing that you're making yourself aware of. I don't understand this. Do you know how many people I see buying rental properties and I'm looking back at them going, that made no sense. I don't tell them that because I don't want to crush their dream, but they made an uneducated purchase. They're probably going to lose money when they go to sell it because what people forget is that the cost to get back out of real estate is very, very expensive. So if you buy a home for $300,000 today and an appraisal comes in and says it's worth $300,000 and you want to sell that home tomorrow and it's still worth $300,000, you've got to pay a buyer's agent commission, which is $9,000. You hypothetically have to pay a buyer's closing cost, which is $4,000. You have to pay the real property transfer tax, owner title policy, and escrow fee, which is another $4,000 or $5,000. The day you bought it, you were flipped in that property at least $25,000. So buying a rental property and saying, I bought my first rental property just to say you bought a rental property is not the way to do it. So if all of this was way over your head, then stop, pull yourself back, get educated, and re-listen to the podcast. I think that's a really important message.
Yeah.
That's the message I'm actually trying to send here. It's very easy to paint this very sexy picture about buying real estate, but there's a way to properly do it. Okay. So analyze ROI, and then we went into using debt responsibly, right?
Yes.
And then the last thing is my model, which is called the KISS model. I'm going to tap into that, and I'm going to explain why I like the KISS model.
Okay, what does KISS stand for?
Keep it
Krystal is
super sexy.
Yeah.
Krystal is super sexy. Now I don't even want to say what the real meaning is. All right. KISS model for me, and I was taught this by my mentors, is keep it simple, stupid. And it's purposely described that way. Don't think you're smarter than you are. Keep it simple, stupid.
And don't make it too complicated.
Right. Don't complicate it. So here's my logic with buying homes with debt versus buying homes cash. You can choose whichever model works for you. But here's what I don't think people are pointing out is if you buy a house and the payment is $1,000 a month, and everybody thinks that when they get their statement showing what their payment is, it shows $860. Well, don't forget that you have property taxes, insurance, HOA, vacancy, and repairs. Okay. So if you factor a 1 month's vacancy into your formula at $1,000 a month, you would go 1,000 divided by 12. That's an $83 expense. Okay. So you have to calculate all of those things in, right?
Just take everything into consideration.
All the things I just described, yes.
Yeah.
So if your payment's $1,000 a month, okay, and the rent is $1,200 a month, and one water heater goes out in that year, that's an $800 fix. And my price is probably like $750. The general public's probably $1,200, right? So if you're cash flowing, net cash flow of $200 a month on that rental property, you're generating $2,400 a month, or excuse me, a year in positive cash flow, right? One water heater, right? Boom, minus $800. Tenant leaves and 8 months into their lease. You lose $1,200 in rent, and that's assuming they left it perfect, which puts you in a position to re-rent it. So I'm going to be very generous here with my scenario. $2,400.
That's $2,200.
$2,400 minus $800 minus $1,200. So you made $400 on that asset over a year. Okay, I don't really like that. I don't want to get a phone call in the middle of the night, not that this ever happens, but this is always a scenario that's used, saying that the toilet is clogged so that I can generate $400 a year. Let's really realistically create a scenario there. That's $33 a month. Okay. So I don't want that phone call.
Right.
But that's the scenario that you can easily get when you use leverage.
Right.
Okay. So now you get to go to parties and say you own 65 homes, 150 homes. Okay, great. Well, you're making $400 a house times, let's just say that you're a rock star and you were able to get 50 of these. You make $20,000 a month at $400 a house. You have 50 headaches to pull off the $20,000 a month.
Yeah.
Okay. Our cash flow on 30 units is about $33,000 a month. We'll say $33K. So I'm making more money than the guy that owns 50 properties, and I only have 30 headaches.
Right.
So he has 50 headaches, and he's making $20,000. I have 30 headaches, and I'm making $33,000. So for me, keep it simple, stupid. Just buy it cash. Or responsibly use leverage.
So responsibly use leverage just for, I know there's probably not like a set number, but what would you say? Would you say like, okay, if you have 5 rentals that like once you finally get to 5, right? Because it takes a minute to get there. Those are all just paid for cash. So it's all cash flow. would you say that's a safe time to take out leverage on one so that you can get another one and have 6 with one payment?
I think I'm going to stick to...
I know it's obviously based on numbers, but what's like a safe...
I'm going to stick to my model.
Simple...
I'm going to stick to my model. What do you think the worst case scenario rent will be at that property? Borrow that amount of money that generates that payment. Just that simple. I have a model. It's not a speculation. It's not, well, this is what I think after 5 you should go do this. On day 1, if you want to use leverage, that's fine. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a spectacular idea. My model is if the rent will, worst case scenario in any market will be $1,000, only borrow that much. That generates a payment of $1,000. Simple. So you can either start by buying a bunch of cash or you can leverage all of them. But that's my model. Or you can listen to the BRRRR model. I don't really care what you do, but I just wanted to create some perspective that there are other models out there that would create more safety long term.
Right.
And that's mine. So let's recap. The thing that we started with is start. And the point is just get off your butt and go do it. Start with 1. If your plans have 30, you got to start somewhere. Start with 1. The product. Buy a product that appeases the masses. I love single stories because everybody can rent a single story. I don't like pools because the pool is required. Do not buy rentals with pools.
No, it creates a liability too.
Here's why. The tenant will never take care of it. So now you have to write a check to take care of it because the repairs are so expensive. So single stories, minimum 3-bedroom if you're buying single family. Analyze the annual rate of return. If you're going to buy a property and you're just starting out, focus on buying something with equity so that you can be put into a position to where you can split the property and buy 2 at that right time, whenever that time does come. Okay, as you progress in your career, I want you to start focusing more on appreciation. Okay, if the house is worth $100,000, then you should be earning 10% on your money. If the house is, if you're buying it for $150 and it's worth $300, then you can sacrifice the higher annual rate of return for a lower rate of return, like 5%, because you have the appreciation that will later be a factor in calculating the total return on the investment. Okay, using debt responsibly. Use the debt responsibly. Whatever the minimum rent or the worst case scenario rent will be on that property, that's the amount of debt that you should take. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And that's really what I think, that's our model. Again, doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. It's what works for us and our family. And it's another perspective of a real life investor doing stuff. Everybody's on the BRRRR thing, and I'm sure that works. But this is just another option in the event that the BRRRR doesn't work for you.
Right.
So I love you.
I love you too.
Good job, honey.
Good job.
Okay. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed the show, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. You can also connect with us on social media or at galindogrouprealestate.com.
Until next time. Thanks again for listening.